The letter had grown creased and faded from its long journey, but Hannah Bauer still clutched it to her chest like a talisman as the stagecoach rumbled through the vast Wyoming landscape. The spring of 1878 spread before her in a tapestry of green and gold, so different from the cramped gray streets of Philadelphia she'd left behind. Her future husband awaited in the frontier town of Silverridge, a man she'd never met, but who had promised her a home and a fresh start in exchange for becoming his wife and a mother to his 4 children. Hannah dabbed at her perspiring forehead with a handkerchief, ignoring the suspicious glances from the other passengers. At 23, she was embarking on what most would consider a fool's errand. Her friends back home certainly thought so. "Just ahead, miss," called the driver. "Silverridge comin' up." Hannah straightened her spine and adjusted her simple blue traveling dress. Her few possessions were packed in the trunk strapped to the back of the coach: clothes, books, and a small wooden box containing her mother's thimble and wedding ring. Everything else she'd left behind, including her position as a schoolteacher, a job that had barely kept her fed after her parents' passing. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of a dusty street lined with wooden buildings. Hannah's heart hammered as she stepped down, scanning the small crowd for the man whose letters had given her hope. Hank Brenner had described himself as a rancher of modest means with 4 children who needed a mother's care since his wife had died of fever 2 years prior. "Miss Bauer." A deep voice caught her attention. She turned to see a tall man in worn denim and a faded shirt, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He removed it, revealing tanned skin, dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, and eyes the color of weathered sage. Lines etched around his mouth spoke of both laughter and hardship. "Mr. Brenner?" Hannah asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Yes, madam," he nodded, shifting awkwardly. "Welcome to Silverridge." Hannah extended her hand, which he took with surprising gentleness. His palm was calloused, telling stories of hard work and struggle. "I trust your journey was comfortable," he asked, releasing her hand and moving to retrieve her trunk. "As comfortable as could be expected," Hannah replied, following him. "Your letters mentioned 4 children." A shadow crossed his face. "They're back at the ranch. Thought it best they meet you there, rather than cause a commotion in town." He loaded her trunk onto a wagon that had seen better days. "It's about 10 miles to the ranch. Hope you don't mind the ride." Hannah climbed up beside him, arranging her skirts. "I've come this far, Mr. Brenner. 10 more miles won't trouble me." As they left town, Hannah studied her future husband's profile. He looked to be in his early 30s, older than her but not by so many years as to seem inappropriate. His letters had been straightforward but kind, describing his need for a wife and mother rather than any romantic notions. "The children," Hannah ventured after they'd ridden in silence for several minutes. "Could you tell me about them?" Hank's hands tightened on the reins. "Samuel's the oldest." 11 now, stubborn as his mother was. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Rebecca's 9, smart as a whip. Then there's Daniel, just turned 7, and little Elizabeth, who's 5. And they know I'm coming," Hannah asked. "They know." His voice was tight. "Can't say they're all pleased about it." Hannah swallowed hard. "I don't expect them to accept me right away, Mr. Brenner. I understand I'm a stranger to them." He glanced at her then, his gaze assessing. "You've got experience with children. Your letters mentioned teaching." "Yes, for 3 years at a girls' school in Philadelphia. Before that, I helped care for my younger siblings until they were grown." Hank nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The ranch isn't much, Miss Bauer. We get by, but there's always work to be done. The house needs a woman's touch." "Has since Caroline passed." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Brenner." "Hank," he corrected. "If you're to be my wife, you should call me Hank." Hannah nodded, warmth creeping into her cheeks. "Then you must call me Hannah." The landscape rolled by, vast and beautiful in its wildness. Hannah spotted a small herd of antelope in the distance, and overhead, hawks circled on thermal currents. The air smelled of sage and dust and possibility. "There it is." Hank said after they'd traveled for over an hour. He pointed to a modest ranch house nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods. A barn and corral stood nearby, and in the distance, cattle grazed on rolling grasslands. As they approached, Hannah saw 4 small figures emerge from the house, standing like sentinels on the porch. "They've been watching for us," Hank said, a note of apology in his voice. "Been on edge all day." Hannah straightened her back and smoothed her hair. First impressions mattered, especially with children. When they pulled up to the house, Hannah could finally see the children clearly. Samuel, the oldest, had his father's dark hair and serious expression. Rebecca was slight, with honey-brown braids and a suspicious gaze. Daniel had a smattering of freckles across his nose and couldn't seem to stand still, while little Elizabeth clutched a rag doll, half hiding behind her older brother. "Children," Hank said as he helped Hannah down from the wagon, "this is Miss Bauer. She's come all the way from Philadelphia to be part of our family." Hannah smiled, though her lips trembled slightly. "I'm very pleased to meet you all. Your father has told me so much about you in his letters." Samuel crossed his arms. "Are you really going to be our new mother?" Hannah met his challenging gaze steadily. "I hope to be, Samuel, if you'll have me, but I know I can't replace your mother and I won't try to." Rebecca stepped forward, chin tilted up. "Can you cook?" "Pa burns everything except beans." A surprised laugh escaped Hannah. "Yes, I can cook quite well. Perhaps you could show me the kitchen later?" Rebecca seemed to consider this, then gave a curt nod. Daniel bounced on his toes. "Do you know any stories?" "Pa's terrible at stories." "Daniel," Hank warned, but Hannah smiled. "I know many stories. It was part of my job as a teacher." Only Elizabeth remained silent, her wide eyes watching Hannah from behind her doll. "Why don't we get Miss Bauer settled?" Hank suggested, lifting Hannah's trunk from the wagon. "Rebecca, show her to the spare room. It's been aired out and ready." Hannah followed Rebecca into the house, noting the sparse but clean interior. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, surrounded by simple furniture that had seen years of use. Bunches of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and a worn quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair added a touch of color. The room Rebecca led her to was small, but had a window overlooking the grasslands. A narrow bed with a fresh mattress and clean linens stood against one wall, and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl occupied another corner. "Pa put in the curtains yesterday," Rebecca said, gesturing to the simple white fabric framing the window. "And the quilt was our mother's." Hannah touched the colorful patchwork quilt. "It's beautiful. Your mother must have been very talented." Rebecca's face clouded. "She was. She made quilts for all of us. Mine has butterflies on it." "Perhaps you could show me sometime," Hannah offered. The girl shrugged, but there was less hostility in her eyes. "Supper's at sundown. Pa killed a chicken this morning, but nobody knows what to do with it." Hannah smiled. "Then it's fortunate I arrived today. I make an excellent roast chicken." Left alone, Hannah unpacked her few possessions, arranging her clothes in the small dresser and placing her mother's thimble on the windowsill. The magnitude of what she'd done suddenly washed over her. She'd traveled across the country to marry a stranger and mother his 4 children in this wild, beautiful land. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Hank stood there, hat in hand. "Everything suitable?" he asked. "Yes, thank you," Hannah replied. "It's a lovely room." He nodded, shifting his weight. "About the wedding. Reverend Matthews comes through once a month. He'll be here next week. Until then, you'll have the spare room, of course." "Of course," Hannah echoed, relief and disappointment mingling strangely in her chest. "That seems appropriate. The children?" Hank hesitated. "They're good kids, but they've been without a mother's influence for a while now. Samuel especially has taken it hard. He was closest to Caroline." Hannah nodded. "Children need time to adjust to change. I don't expect miracles, Hank." His eyes warmed slightly at her use of his name. "I'm grateful you're here, Hannah, truly." With that, he left her to finish unpacking, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity, as Hannah familiarized herself with the kitchen and prepared supper. The children hovered nearby, curious but wary, except for Daniel, who peppered her with questions about Philadelphia and her journey west. The chicken, seasoned with herbs Hannah found growing in a small garden behind the house, was declared a success by all, even the reluctant Samuel. After the meal, Hank showed Hannah the rest of the modest ranch, the barn with its horses and milk cow, the chicken coop, and the vegetable garden that needed tending. Caroline always kept it flourishing, Hank said, gesturing to the overgrown plot. I've tried, but between the ranch work and the children, I'll have it in shape soon, Hannah promised. I grew up helping my father with our garden. As twilight deepened into night, Hannah sat on the porch, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft lowing of cattle. Inside, she could hear Hank getting the children ready for bed, his deep voice rumbling instructions about washing faces and saying prayers. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, clutching her doll. She approached Hannah cautiously, then held out a small wildflower. For you, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. Hannah's heart swelled as she accepted the gift. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's beautiful. The little girl nodded solemnly, then darted back inside like a startled fawn. Later, after the children were asleep, Hank joined Hannah on the porch, offering her a cup of coffee. Elizabeth gave you her special flower, he noted. She's been saving it since yesterday. Hannah smiled, touched by the gesture. She's precious. They all are in their own ways. Hank gazed out at the darkened prairie. I want you to know, Hannah, that I don't expect. That is, this marriage doesn't have to be. Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. I understand our arrangement, Hank. You need someone to care for your children and your home. He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the stars above. Yes, but I also hope we might find companionship in time, perhaps even affection. The honesty in his voice touched something in Hannah. I hope for that too. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee as the moon rose over the vast Wyoming wilderness that was to be Hannah's new home. The days leading up to the wedding fell into a pattern. Hannah rose early to help Hank with breakfast before he headed out to work with the cattle. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house, discovering forgotten corners and breathing new life into the home. The afternoons were devoted to the garden, with Rebecca and Elizabeth often helping her weed and plant the seedlings Hank had brought from town. Samuel kept his distance, watching Hannah with wary eyes, but Daniel followed her like a shadow, eager for stories and attention. By the third day, even Elizabeth had begun to chatter freely around Hannah, showing her collection of pretty stones and feathers hidden in a small box beneath her bed. On the fourth night, Hannah was reading to the younger children when Samuel appeared in the doorway of the small bedroom the boys shared. That's not how Ma used to do the voices, he said, his young face set in stubborn lines. Hannah closed the book. Would you show me how she did them? Surprise flickered across Samuel's face, followed by suspicion. You're trying to be like her. No, Samuel, Hannah said gently. I know I can never be your mother, but I would like to learn the things that made you happy, the traditions that matter to your family. He hesitated, then entered the room and took the book from her hands. She did the wolf like this, he said, deepening his voice and adding a growling undertone that made Daniel giggle and Elizabeth squeal in delighted fright. Hannah smiled. That's much better than my version. Perhaps you could help me with the story tomorrow night, Samuel shrugged, but the rigid set of his shoulders had softened slightly. Maybe. That night, Hannah heard crying coming from Rebecca's room. She found the girl curled up on her bed, clutching the butterfly quilt her mother had made. I dreamed about her again, Rebecca hiccuped as Hannah sat beside her. I can't remember her face anymore, not really. Hannah stroked the girl's hair. Would it help to talk about her? I'd like to know what she was like. Rebecca sniffed. She sang all the time. Even when she was angry, she'd sing under her breath. What songs did she like? Beautiful Dreamer was her favorite. She'd sing it while brushing my hair. Hannah began to hum the melody softly, and Rebecca's tears gradually subsided. When the girl finally drifted back to sleep, Hannah found Hank standing in the hallway, watching them with an unreadable expression. "You're good with them," he said, as Hannah gently closed Rebecca's door. "They're good children," Hannah replied. "They miss their mother terribly." Hank nodded, grief shadowing his features. Caroline was the heart of this place. When she died, it was like all the color went with her. Hannah touched his arm tentatively. "Tell me about her." They moved to the kitchen, where Hank poured them each a small glass of whiskey. He rarely spoke of personal matters, but tonight, the words poured out of him how he'd met Caroline at a harvest dance, her laughter that could charm birds from trees, her fierce love for her children and the land. "She wanted a big garden," he said, staring into his glass. "Said it wasn't a proper home without flowers." "The rose bush by the porch, was that hers?" Hannah asked. "Yes, brought it all the way from St. Louis as a cutting, nearly died getting it established, but she was stubborn." A smile touched his lips. "Like Samuel." "He's very like you too," Hannah observed. "He has your steadfastness." Hank's eyes met hers. "Thank you for being patient with him, with all of them. They're grieving Hank, and they're afraid I'm here to replace their mother." "And what are you afraid of?" he asked quietly. Hannah considered the question. "That I won't be enough, that this life, this place, is too big for me to fill." Hank reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "The land has a way of shaping people to fit it, not the other way around. You're stronger than you know, Hannah Bauer." The warmth of his hand and the certainty in his voice kindled something in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The day before Reverend Matthews was due to arrive, disaster struck. Hannah was hanging laundry when she heard Elizabeth's terrified scream from the direction of the creek. She dropped the wet sheet and ran, heart in her throat, to find Elizabeth standing on the bank, pointing frantically at the water where Daniel thrashed, caught in the current. Without hesitation, Hannah waded in, the cold spring water shocking her system. Daniel's panicked face disappeared beneath the surface just as she reached him. She plunged her arms into the swirling water, grabbing his shirt and hauling him up, fighting the current that threatened to sweep them both downstream. "Hold on to me," she gasped, and felt his small arms lock around her neck with desperate strength. Struggling back to the shore, Hannah collapsed on the grassy bank with Daniel coughing and sputtering in her arms. Elizabeth stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "Get your father," Hannah told her, and the little girl took off running toward the pastures where Hank was working. Hannah held Daniel close, murmuring reassurances as he trembled against her. By the time Hank arrived at a dead run, Daniel had stopped coughing up water but remained pale and frightened. "What happened?" Hank demanded, falling to his knees beside them, his face ashen. "I just wanted to catch a frog," Daniel said in a small voice. "I slipped." Hank gathered his son into his arms, his eyes meeting Hannah's over the boy's head. "You saved him." "Anyone would have done the same," Hannah said, suddenly aware of her sodden dress and chattering teeth. "Not anyone," Hank said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." That evening, after Daniel had been tucked into bed with extra blankets and a cup of Hannah's honey lemon tea for his raw throat, Samuel approached Hannah as she sat mending by the fire. "Ma taught us not to go in the creek during spring melt," he said abruptly. Daniel forgot. Hannah set down her sewing. "It was an accident, Samuel. Children forget sometimes. You didn't even think about it," he continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "You just went in after him." "He needed help." Samuel studied her face. "Pa says you could have been swept away too. Your father worries too much," Hannah said lightly, though the memory of the current's strength sent a shiver through her. "Would you have done it if he wasn't Pa's son, if he was just some kid?" The question startled her. "Of course." Samuel seemed to weigh her answer. "Ma would have too." He turned to leave, then paused. "I'm glad you didn't let him drown." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but Hannah recognized it for the olive branch it was. "So am I, Samuel, so am I." Later, when the house was quiet, Hannah stepped onto the porch to find Hank sitting on the steps, a blanket in his hands. "Thought you might be cold," he said, holding it out to her. Hannah accepted it gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders as she sat beside him. "The stars are magnificent here. In Philadelphia, the city lights dimmed them." "One of the things I love about this place," Hank agreed. "You can see all the way to forever." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. "I was thinking," Hank finally said, "about tomorrow and the Reverend." Hannah's pulse quickened. "Yes, if you've changed your mind after today, if you've seen what life here can be like and decided it's not what you want, I'd understand." Hannah turned to look at him. "Are you asking if I want to leave?" Hank kept his eyes on the distant horizon. "I'm saying you have the choice. The stagecoach leaves at noon." "Do you want me to go?" The question emerged barely above a whisper. Now he did look at her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. "No." "I want you to stay, Hannah. The children need you. He hesitated. "I find I've grown accustomed to your presence." It wasn't a declaration of love, but Hannah heard the truth in his words. "Then I'll stay, Hank. Today didn't frighten me away. Quite the opposite." Relief softened his features. "Tomorrow, then," Hannah smiled. "Tomorrow." Reverend Matthews arrived shortly after breakfast, a jovial man with a bushy beard and kind eyes. The ceremony was simple, held in the parlor with the children as witnesses. Hannah wore her best dress, a dove gray with lace at the collar, and someone she suspected Rebecca had placed a sprig of wildflowers in her hair. "Do you, Hannah Bauer, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Reverend Matthews asked, his voice filling the small room. Hannah looked at Hank, standing tall and solemn in his best shirt, and felt certainty wash over her. "I do." After the ceremony and a celebratory meal that Hannah and Rebecca had spent the morning preparing, Reverend Matthews departed for his next destination, leaving the newly formed family alone. That night, after the children were asleep, Hannah stood nervously in the bedroom that was now hers to share with Hank. She had changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, her hands trembling slightly at the intimacy to come. When Hank entered, he seemed equally uncertain. "I can sleep in the barn if you need more time," he offered. Hannah shook her head. "We're married now." He approached her slowly, as one might a skittish horse. "Yes, but that doesn't mean—" He took a deep breath. "I want this to be right between us, Hannah, not just duty." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his day's growth of beard. "I chose this, Hank. I chose you and the children and this life." His hands came to rest on her waist, warm and steady. "I never expected to find someone like you," he admitted. "After Caroline, I thought that part of my life was over." "And now?" Hannah asked, her voice barely audible. In answer, Hank lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle exploration that deepened as Hannah responded. When they parted, both were breathing harder, and the uncertainty had been replaced by something warmer. "Now," Hank said, his voice husky, "I think we might have a chance at happiness, Mrs. Brenner." The transition from Miss Bauer to Mrs. Brenner brought both challenges and joys. The children tested her in various ways, Samuel with his stoic resistance, Rebecca with her questions about whether Hannah would change their mother's ways, Daniel with his boundless energy and mischief, and Elizabeth with her silent observations. Yet each day brought small victories. When Hannah discovered Caroline's recipe box tucked away in a kitchen drawer, she and Rebecca spent an afternoon baking the molasses cookies that had been a family favorite. The familiar scent brought tears to Hank's eyes when he returned from working the cattle. "You found her recipes," he said, picking up a cookie with reverence. "Rebecca showed me where they were," Hannah replied, watching as Samuel tentatively reached for a cookie, sniffing it before taking a bite. "Tastes almost the same," he declared, which Hannah recognized as high praise. The garden flourished under Hannah's care, with Elizabeth appointed official waterer, a task she took very seriously. Daniel helped Hank with the livestock, proudly learning to ride the gentle mare Hank had been saving for him. And Samuel, though still reserved, began to seek Hannah out in quiet moments. asking for help with his reading or simply sitting beside her on the porch in the evenings. Summer arrived, bringing long days of hard work and warm nights where the family often sat outside. Hannah sewing or mending while Hank whittled and the children played nearby. The physical side of their marriage had grown tender and passionate, and Hannah found herself falling in love with her husband, not the idealized man from his letters, but the real Hank Brenner with his quiet strength, dry humor, and unwavering devotion to his family. One sultry August evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance promising a break in the heat, Hannah found Samuel sitting alone on the porch steps. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded, scooting over slightly to make room. They sat in silence, watching heat lightning illuminate the distant clouds. "I've been thinking," Samuel finally said, his young voice serious. "About mothers." Hannah waited, letting him find his words. "Ma always said that love isn't like a pie, where if you give a piece to someone new, there's less for everyone else." He picked at a splinter on the step. "She said love is more like a garden. The more you tend it, the more it grows." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Your mother sounds very wise." She was. Samuel looked up at her, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I think she would have liked you." Hannah swallowed past the lump in her throat. "That means more to me than I can say, Samuel." The boy leaned against her side, just slightly. "Is it okay if I still miss her, even though I like you too?" "Oh, Samuel." Hannah put her arm around his thin shoulders. "Of course it is. I would never want to take her place in your heart. I just hope to find my own place there, if you'll let me." He nodded against her shoulder. "I think maybe you already have." The thunderstorm broke over them then, sending them running inside amid fat raindrops and peals of thunder. As Hannah helped the children prepare for bed, she caught Hank watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Later, when the house was quiet except for the drumming of rain on the roof, Hank pulled her close in their bed. "You've changed everything," he murmured against her hair. "For the better, I hope," Hannah replied, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "In ways I didn't know were possible." He kissed her deeply, then drew back to look into her eyes. "I love you, Hannah, not just for what you've done for the children or for the ranch, for yourself." Tears welled in her eyes. "I love you too, Hank. I never imagined I could be this happy." As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Hannah noticed her dresses growing tighter around the waist. She kept the suspicion to herself until she was certain, then shared the news with Hank one evening after the children were asleep. His face transformed with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby, are you sure?" Hannah nodded, covering his hand with hers. "Come spring, we'll have another little Brenner to love." The joy in his eyes mirrored her own, but then a shadow crossed his face. Caroline had a difficult time with Elizabeth. The doctor warned her against having more children. Hannah squeezed his hand. "Every birth is different, Hank, and I'm strong and healthy." "Yes, you are," he agreed, pulling her into his arms, "the strongest woman I know." They decided to wait to tell the children, but fate intervened when Elizabeth caught Hannah being sick one morning and ran to get her father in a panic. That evening, they gathered the children in the parlor. "We have some news," Hank began, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Hannah is going to have a baby. You're all going to have a new brother or sister in the spring." Rebecca's eyes widened. "A baby?" Here, Daniel bounced on his seat. "Can I teach it to ride?" "Not right away," Hannah laughed. "Babies need to grow a bit first." Elizabeth approached Hannah cautiously. "Can I touch it?" she asked, eyeing Hannah's stomach. "Of course." Hannah took the little girl's hand and placed it on her abdomen. "The baby's too small to feel yet, but it's in there, growing." Elizabeth's face lit up with wonder. "I won't be the littlest anymore." Only Samuel remained quiet, watching from his place by the fireplace. After the others had dispersed, excited by the news, he approached Hannah. "Will it change things?" he asked, his voice low. "The baby." Hannah understood his fear. "Some things will change, Samuel. Babies need a lot of care, but what won't change is how much we all love each other." "Pa says you'll need extra help," Samuel said. "That we'll all need to pitch in." Hannah nodded. That's true, but it's also a special time for our family. This baby will be lucky to have such wonderful big brothers and sisters. Samuel seemed to consider this. I could teach it stuff, like Ma taught me. Hannah felt her heart swell. I think that would be perfect. As her pregnancy progressed, Hannah found the entire family rallying around her. Hank insisted she rest more, taking on additional household tasks himself. Rebecca appointed herself Hannah's official helper, learning to cook simple meals and taking pride in keeping the house tidy. Daniel curbed his usual wildness when around Hannah, and Elizabeth spent hours talking to the baby through Hannah's growing belly. Even Samuel found ways to show his concern, bringing Hannah a cup of the raspberry leaf tea Rebecca had prepared or reading aloud to her from one of her books when she needed to rest. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Christmas was celebrated with simple homemade gifts and a feast that the entire family helped prepare. As they sat around the table, Hannah looked at these people who had become her family in less than a year and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I'd like to propose a toast," Hank said, raising his cup of cider. "To family, old and new, to memories cherished and memories yet to make." "To Mom," Samuel said unexpectedly, looking directly at Hannah. It was the first time he had called her that, and the significance wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Hannah blinked back tears as the other children echoed, "To Mom." Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new calves in the pastures. Hannah's time grew near, and Hank arranged for the doctor's wife, Mrs. Fletcher, to stay at the ranch for the last week of her confinement. The children watched Hannah with a mixture of excitement and concern as her discomfort increased. Were we this much trouble? Rebecca asked one afternoon as she helped Hannah fold baby clothes. "Every baby is different," Hannah replied, easing herself into a chair. "But bringing new life into the world is always worth it." The labor began on a warm April evening, just as the sun was setting. Hank sent the children to stay with a neighboring family, despite their protests, and Mrs. Fletcher took charge of the birthing room with brisk efficiency. The hours blurred together for Hannah in a haze of pain and determination. Hank remained by her side, his strong hand anchoring her through each contraction, his voice a steady encouragement in her ear. "You're doing beautifully," Mrs. Fletcher assured her as dawn broke. "Not much longer now." With a final, tremendous effort, Hannah brought their daughter into the world, a robust baby girl with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival with impressive volume. "She's perfect," Hank whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he cradled the swaddled infant. Just like her mother. They named her Hope Caroline Brenner, honoring both the future and the past. When the children returned and crowded around to see their new sister, their faces reflected the same awe Hannah felt every time she looked at her daughter. "She's so tiny," Elizabeth breathed, reaching out a careful finger to touch the baby's cheek. "She looks like Pa," Daniel declared. "She looks like a baby," Samuel corrected, but he was smiling. Rebecca leaned against Hannah's side. "What does it feel like to be a mother?" Hannah looked around at these 5 children, 4 she had inherited, and 1 she had born, and the man who watched them all with love shining in his eyes. "It feels like home," she said simply. "Like finding where you're meant to be." Years passed, and the Brenner Ranch flourished along with its family. Hope grew into a spirited toddler with her father's eyes and her mother's determination. The other children thrived as well, Samuel becoming his father's right hand with the ranch operations, Rebecca discovering a talent for teaching that Hannah nurtured, Daniel breaking horses with a natural ability that drew buyers from counties away, and Elizabeth showing an artistic gift that transformed the simple homestead with beauty. On the 5th anniversary of Hannah's arrival in Silverridge, the family held a celebration. Friends from town and neighboring ranches gathered to share food and music and stories. As twilight fell, Hank found Hannah watching the children dance to a fiddle tune. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Beyond measure," she replied, leaning into his strength. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't placed that advertisement for a mail-order bride? Hank considered this. I like to think we would have found each other somehow. That we were meant to be a family. Hannah watched as Samuel twirled Hope, now 4, in a circle, her delighted laughter carrying across the yard. Rebecca stood nearby with a young man from town, their heads bent close together. Daniel was showing Elizabeth a new dance step, both of them laughing as they stumbled. I came west looking for a fresh start, Hannah said. What I found was so much more. Hank turned her to face him, his eyes reflecting the love that had grown between them day by day, challenge by challenge. You became the heart of this family, Hannah Brenner. The mother these children needed, the wife I never dared hope for. As the music swelled around them, Hank pulled Hannah into a dance, their movements as naturally aligned as their lives had become. Above them, stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, witnesses to a love that had bloomed from necessity into something rare and precious, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by challenge, and by love that grew with each passing season. Later that night, with Hope asleep between them on the porch swing, Hannah and Hank watched as a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens. Make a wish, Hank murmured. Hannah smiled, her hand finding his in the darkness. I already have everything I could wish for. And as the Wyoming night cradled them in its vastness, Hannah Brenner thought of the letter that had brought her west, now preserved in a memory box alongside locks of hair from each child, dried flowers from her wedding, and the small knitted booties from Hope's birth. That letter had been the beginning of a journey that led her here to this land, this man, these children who had become hers in every way that mattered. She had come as a mail-order bride and found a family. She had come seeking purpose and found love. She had come as Hannah Bauer and become Hannah Brenner, mother, wife, and heart of a home that grew stronger with each passing year. And in that moment, with her daughter's gentle breathing and her husband's steady presence beside her, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that this family, this love, this life was exactly where she was meant to be.